Thanks again. Let's continue with the final presentation before we start reflecting what we learned on the panel. So we have with us now Jon Ferris, Head of Flexibility and Storage at LCP Delta, and he will talk about unlocking flexibility for residential and C&I prosumers. Jon, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Michael, and all the speakers before me. I am Jon Ferris. Thank you for the introduction. As we're running a little late on time, I won't go into detail on LCP Delta, but please do visit our website and see all the services that we provide across the energy transition in Europe. I'm today going to talk you through the solar coaster that we call it in Europe, and make the case based on my 20 years of experience in flexibility markets in Europe that we've been here before, that the PV, the solar revolution, and it is a revolution, is going through a phase shift. We've had a phase shift before and come out stronger thanks to structural reforms and new business models. And we're now entering the third phase of that revolution. The first phase, the build-up to 2012, solar was small scale and was barely noticeable on the system. If you recall at the time, we called it alternative energy. The Energiewende in Germany was particularly instrumental in supporting solar households who were attractive to retailers. They tended to be consumers who could invest not just in solar, but in high electrification devices, were typically high users. And at the time, the premise for solar, the business model, was relatively simple. Providing distributed generation in parts of the network that were typically demand constrained, and providing that generation at times of peak load, it provided a benefit both to networks and to markets. It provided benefit to the retailer. But the challenge was the capital cost. We've heard earlier about the decline in module prices. At the time, a subsidy either for capital cost and for a feed-in tariff or net metering were required to bridge the gap between the avoided costs from implicit flexibility, from self-consumption and avoiding network charges, and the capital cost required. So all of these value streams are not particularly market dependent, but were created to seed the market, to help the industry get off its feet. And it provided an opportunity for residential householders, but a relatively small opportunity, or it delivered relatively small capacity compared to the opportunity. It focused on single-family households and was really challenging for multi-family households to participate in the solar revolution. And although the falling module prices outstripped the declines in the feed-in tariffs, the payback periods dropped rapidly, scale increased, and we started to see the feed-in tariffs used not for residential or C&I solar, but we saw farmers' fields and agricultural land covered in solar panels, which was really not the intention at the time. So net metering programs were ended, and the feed-in tariffs, particularly in Germany and Great Britain around 2011, 2012, were slashed. And that had a very sudden and detrimental impact on installations of PV as you can see from the chart, where we move into phase two, which started with a 10-year period where installations were lower than in 2011. It took 10 years to recover, despite in that time having high prices due to the rise in oil prices following the Arab Spring, nuclear shutdowns following the tsunami in Japan. And it was only really post-COVID and the energy crisis where we saw high gas prices, a move towards reducing peak winter demand, and the opportunity to really grow solar, where we've seen it move to another level. But we're still trying to fit this capacity of solar into the old energy system, which was created for thermal plant. Consumers were passive, and retailers bore the risk of their consumers' passive consumption. Solar really had a more complicated business model in this environment than under the feed-in tariff and net metering schemes. And yet, despite that rise in solar capacity, we can see it was only towards the end of this period that capacity of solar generation really made a material impact on the overall capacity in Europe. It's now the second largest capacity out of all the generation technologies. This is starting to cause issues on the network, with network congestion and connection queues, making it difficult for DSOs to accommodate more capacity on their networks. And yet, in terms of total generation, it's not, on an annual basis, a particularly large source, only the sixth largest source of generation in 2024. But that masks the seasonal differences, where the recent report highlighted that solar was the largest source of generation in June 2025. And that brings with it other challenges, particularly those of negative wholesale prices, particularly at times of high solar generation. That does make the return on the merchant business model somewhat challenging. And so we're starting to see business models change to take into account both the temporal and locational value of electricity. We've seen the rise of direct marketing, where solar is traded on the day ahead and intraday markets, based not on longer term forecasts, but on the more accurate forecasts of generation on the day ahead basis. But we've seen a big digression in the feed-in tariff, which has caused incentives both to shift and store power from solar in order to be able to take advantage of the other markets. We're seeing at times of high solar generation very high prices for frequency ancillary services, particularly for downward flexibility. And here we're starting to see solar generators participate in providing ancillary services with self-curtailment, actually providing services to system operators to turn down generation in times of need. And so the revenue in the business model is not just from implicit and behind the meter cost savings, but explicit revenue from providing market services. And part of the reason for that is that the risk, the wholesale risk, is being passed to consumers through an increase in dynamic tariffs. To some extent, this is giving with one hand and taking away with the other. We're seeing a feed-in premium replacing feed-in tariffs and net metering, but where they do exist, they're starting to be supplemented with a higher standing charge for recovery of fixed cost, a net metering injection charge, and in the Netherlands, a feed-in cost. So if you are putting your excess solar into the market, you're being charged for the benefit of doing that. Solar households have become less attractive to retailers, who are now offering wholesale reflective energy rates, both on the one hand to encourage consumption when prices are low and solar generation is high, but it also gives an implicit cost to households, especially when the rates turn negative, for feeding excess solar into the market. And yet, we're still seeing the benefit behind the meter of those avoided network charges that were part of the first phase. And we're also seeing the growth of segments that have not been able to access solar before. Balcony solar has had a rapid growth in Europe in the last few years and is expected to exceed 1 gigawatt of capacity this year. It has a lower install cost. It's more accessible to renters and those that don't own their own homes or roofs. But also, the combination of balcony solar plus storage in an accessible, affordable package is really becoming the growth market for residential consumers. And you can see the opportunity is still high for residential consumers, whether they're in single family homes or multifamily homes, to participate in the solar revolution. We're still an order of magnitude up from the first phase, but we can still increase capacity by an order of magnitude. And so we're now entering this third phase, which is really the transformation. We've had the introduction, where solar had a negligible impact on the system. We've had the integration, where we're trying to fit solar into an energy system built for thermal generators and one-way flows of power. The transformation that's coming up is one where we're building the energy system around abundant solar capacity, abundant generation, around a digital industry, and the challenge is how to harness excess solar or to constrain excess solar to stop it causing harm to the networks. And at residential, commercial and industrial levels, there are a number of ways that this can be done. We've seen the growth of large-scale batteries on the system. We're now seeing the hybridization of solar and storage, both from standalone batteries and electric vehicles at residential or individual and commercial levels. We've seen the growth of maybe the rise and fall of Bitcoin mining using excess solar, and now we're looking at other opportunities, particularly in heating. As we've heard earlier, there's electrification of transport and heating is becoming more aligned. So combining a heat pump, refrigeration, and particularly where you have high temperatures at times of high solar generation, the integration of air conditioning and PV is well matched. E-boilers replacing gas, and we're waking up to the opportunities of self-curtailment. The returns on solar generation can be higher by cutting output at peak times when generation is high and prices are negative. That's quite a challenge to the perception for installers and developers that any generation must be positive. Too much of a good thing means that curtailment should be part of the business model when it's commercial. And so to wrap up, the opportunity for harnessing solar and consumption assets is growing. There are lots of assets out there. Connecting, coordinating, and optimizing those assets is the next challenge. Participating in all of the potential value streams, recognizing the temporal and locational value of electricity, following the market incentives to shift, is a core part of the new business model for flexibility from solar. These will evolve over the lifetime of the asset, and I think we've seen behind the meter optimization can be much more complex than a simple grid battery. But the opportunities and the benefits that it brings to the system can be substantial as well. So thank you. I will wrap up there and hand back to Michael.
Okay, wonderful. Jon, perfect. Okay, I think that transitions nicely into our last task, which is our panel. And so if there's any questions from the audience, please feel free to ask your questions in the webinar.